Hello all. Happy holidays. It is the day after Christmas. This is December 26th, and we are beginning chapter unit 7A. This is the introduction of memory unit. It's kind of convoluted. A lot of it is brand new material. Brand new material, as meaning in the last 20 years. With 7A, there are 39 vocab terms, so you better start cracking on that. We're going to go through approximately half of the unit in this video. At the end of the video, I'll post links to enrichment videos. One is from Nova. One is an hour-long radio story from Radiolab. I would highly recommend it. Best way to listen to that, quite honestly, is turn off your phone, plug in headphones to something that will play it, turn off your lights, lay down and don't fall asleep, and listen, okay? So we're starting off with 7A. Here your text. If you did not bring your text home over the holiday, you can find a link to a bunch of the pages, not all the pages, on the Edmodo on the Edmodo group page. You should be able to find that just fine. If you have problems, just email me. So starting out with 7A, cognition, memory. What is memory? There's a lot of different theories of how the mind works, a lot of them, and what memory is and how memory itself works. A lot of them are patterned after things that are modern at the time of the construction of the theory. For instance, if you asked your grandparents, what is memory like? They'll be like, oh, well, it's kind of like a filing cabinet where everything is held, or a file folder where all your memories are just stacked in and filed into chronological order or subject order. And it's not really like that. If you ask someone modern today, what is memory like? They'll go, oh, it's like a computer hard drive. It's like it's all the memory packed into one place, and it's like it's written to the disk, and then it's retrieved from the disk, and then you remember it. No, because that would mean there would only be one information stream going in and coming out. The brain doesn't work that way. We don't process in a single stream, in and out. We parallel process. We process multiple things in multiple dimensions at the same time. That's the way our brain works. And at the same time, when our brain works that way, all that information is encoded in parallel processing, in parallel ways. And also, well, quite honestly, it's like, okay, think about if you drive a car right now. What color is your car? Let's say it's gray. When you look at the gray sky, does it make you think of your car? If you see your model of car, but it's red driving down the street, do you think of your car? How are these things related to memory? What jogs your memory more than other things? These are some of the things and concepts we're going to talk about through the rest of the unit. Now, the textbook talks about memory as the persistence of learning over time through storage and retrieval of information. Storage and retrieval. Memory is just not storage. Because what is a memory that's never retrieved? Does it exist? Does a tree in the forest that falls, does it make a sound if no one's there? Same type of philosophy. But it's the storage and retrieval. And we're going to discuss why storage and retrieval are both very important in the formation of memory. So we're turning the page. By the way, we started on 255. And I am feeling slightly better. Coming down sick literally the next morning after starting break was not my idea of fun. So, okay. On the top of 257, the book breaks it down. The memory information processing. It goes, okay. To remember any event, we must get information to our own brain. That's encoding. And that's sensation and perception, right? That's sensing, that's perceiving things in the world, and getting that information from the physical environment in front of us through our sensory organs, perceiving them, and having the information in our brain. What do we do from there? we encode it. Well, what does that mean? We must get information into our brain. That doesn't sound like a really good definition, so let's look at the opposite page here. The process of information into the processing of information into the memory system, for example, by extracting meaning. That's kind of like perception, but different. It's categorizing and breaking down by schema type, by finding commonalities and similarities and differences between other things we have observed. It's integrating that and accommodating that new data, that new sensation perception into our schema, that encoding that's forming not only new information but also new memory. So then we retain that information, storage. Basically, this is where the whole filing cabinet concept of memory comes into play. And finally, and later, we get it back out. We retrieve it. Basically, the memory, the sensation, perception comes in, whether it be auditory, tactile, physical, or basically olfactory, right? Taste. It can be all these different vision. It can be all these different sensations. When we retrieve it as a memory. Now, Richard Atkinson and Richard Schifrin proposed that we form memories in 3 stages. 1, we first record to be remembered information. Record to be remembered information as a fleeting sensory memory. 2, from there we process information into short-term memory, where we encode it through rehearsal. We'll talk about rehearsal in a little bit. 3, finally, information moves into long-term memory for later retrieval. Long-term memory, kind of like this bedhead. Actually, no, it's on this side. Going on? I just noticed that. You're all gonna laugh at me. I don't really care. Finally, information moves into long-term memory, and that's the goal. That is the goal for schoolwork. That is the goal for all learning, is to be able to retrieve the things that are important. Now, why do we remember some things that are completely not important and remember others that are? What is the difference in the way we rehearse that gives preference for some memories over others? Now, this graph down here, take a look at it at the angry NASCAR guy. It's kind of humorous, but it shows you the process of forming memory. But at the same time, keep in mind, this is a very basic explanation. There's a lot more nuance to it, especially when you start combining previous units, examples, such as schema theory and also our sensation and perception type theories. And working memory. Working memory. A newer understanding of Atkinson's and Schifrin's second stage concentrates on the active processing of information in this intermediate stage. Because we cannot possibly focus on all the information bombarding our senses at once, we shine the flashlight beam of our attention on certain incoming stimuli. This working memory, guys, this is our attention. You remember attention blindness and change blindness and stuff like that? This is what they're talking about. It's the same phenomenon explained from a different perspective. Okay? With change blindness, we are talking about it from a sensation and perception perspective, the same type of event. In here, with working memory, we're explaining the same type of event and occurring result through a memory and cognitive approach. We're going to start running into this problem more and more. You're going to be explain something and you're going to be like, oh, that's this, and you're 100% right. But we have to flip it on its head a little bit. When we flip it on its head, we see things from a different perspective, and when we see it from a different perspective, well, we understand it in a different dimension, and that is important. Now, encoding. Getting the information in. And the book starts off with parallel processing, guys. Remember, parallel processing is when we look at a dog. Let's say we see a dog. We don't just look at the dog. We look at everything about the dog, everything in the environment. If we were given a picture, if we walk out into our backyard and see a strange dog, we're not only just taking note of the dog, we're taking note of the temperature, how bright or cloudy it is it raining, is the ground saturated with water, is the ground frozen, is the dog furry, is the dog short-haired, is the dog large, medium, small, what breed is the dog, the disposition of the dog, the temperament of the dog, how fast the dog is moving, and we start to really try to make inferences about the dog's intentions. And we do this all at once. We don't go, oh wow, look, it's a great day, and oh, there's a dog, and oh, what's that? Some sort of terrier. Yeah, it's not supposed to be out here. It's really cold. Yeah, but it looks friendly. No, we do it instantaneously, and that's parallel processing. Okay, guys? For example, without conscious effort, you automatically process information about space, time, frequency, and well-learned information. Thank you, book, for reinforcing me. Deciphering words was not always easy when you first learned to read. You sounded out individual letters to figure out what words they make. With effort, you plodded slowly through a mere 20 to 50 words per page. I'm going through this right now with Alexander. Reading, like some other forms of processing, initially requires attention and effort, but with experience and practice becomes automatic. Imagine learning to read reverse sentences like this. And there's the sentence right there. This is at the top of 259. Effortful processing can become automatic. And I could probably read it that fast because I'm dyslexic. But it's not that hard for me, just as reading upside down isn't hard for me. But different people have different ways of perceiving because it's an adaptation. I need it to survive. I needed it to survive through school. Most people don't. So that is automatic parallel processing. Sorry, I'm sitting on a bed, but there's no bounce, see? The bounce has been negated because it's on a chair now and a couple milk crates. So, effortful processing. Different than automatic processing. Some people who are very, very lucky in this world, it's the same thing. This is the kid who sits next to you in class and just slightly glances at the textbook and they know it all like that. They are annoying. They are gifted. Their processing of information is typically automatic or requires very little purposeful, effortful processing. So effortful processing, encoding that requires attention and conscious effort. This is what you're supposed to be doing in school. Is not just the automatic processing, which many of you do while in class, is try to listen and just process through, listening and kind of following along. But effortful processing is what you should be doing in those time periods. And then according to the textbook, it produces durable and accessible memories. That might improve your grades, just saying. Now, while learning novel information such as vocabulary terms, hint, 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 we can boost our memory through rehearsal or conscious repetition. Those are flashcards, guys. That's what you do when you go on Quizlet. And you're just, that's what you do. It's rehearsal. It's the same type of rehearsal when you think of people rehearsing for a play. And the same type of result happens. When people rehearse for a play, the play gets better. The production gets better. They can focus on smaller and smaller aspects of making it better. When you rehearse, whether it be vocab terms for psych, mathematic formulas, um, equations in chemistry or physics. When you rehearse these, you have greater fluency. When you have greater fluency, you can actually use more of the content. What I mean is, think of it this way. If the concept we're talking about, for instance, is schema. One of the things I harp about a few units ago. In order to really utilize the concept really well, you have to have a fluid working knowledge of it. You just don't need to know the vocabulary term and what it kind of means, but you need to actively be able to use it in context and to identify it when it's actually presented to you. That's going to really separate from you passing a vocab test to really having mastery of the content. And that's what really many times separates good students from great students. This rehearsal, it could take many different forms. It's not just, flashcards or whatever it is. It could be practice. If you think about a sport or a musical instrument, it's the same type of thing. Whether it be drills within music and sports, it's practice. It's the same type of thing. And why our society is so bent on it and our teachers are so bent on this is because it works. It's effective. If the subject puts in the effort. And that's what it all comes down to, is effort. Now, remember at the beginning of the year, and I've also talked about this occasionally, how to study, even in class. I did this to every single class. I told you to write down the vocab words that you don't know after all this time. You can't retrieve them in memory. And basically build up a new working knowledge of them and rehearse them over and over again by going through all the ones in chapter 1 until you know them again. Then move on to chapter 2 and then rehearse those. Then go back to chapter 1 and rehearse those. That is reinforcement. That's a schedule of reinforcement. And we went over that last chapter, the chapter before. Now, right here on the next page, on 260 at the top, it talks about the spacing effect. The spacing effect is going over materials longitudinally over time and getting better and better proficiency with it. Because those neurological connections are further strengthened. They are not curtailed or trimmed, but in fact they are reinforced. For instance, if you just jump ahead onto 269, you see that this figure 7a.13, you see a scanning electron microscope looking at a synaptic gap with literally one receptor site. And after stimulation, repeated stimulation, where this neurological connection was used more and more often, it actually developed a second synapse. So basically more neurological traffic can be handled across the synaptic gap because the concept was being retrieved more and more often. Now, spacing effect, guys, is chunking. And we basically talk about chunking in another different page, and I believe 2 pages from now. The spacing effect is you work on a subject for a half hour and you put it down for 10 minutes or a half hour or even an hour and you go back to it for another half hour, and that time in between allows your brain actually to take it from being working memory, short-term memory, and start encoding it, reinforcing it as a very strong short-term memory, so that when you sleep, it can be encoded into long-term memory. And once it's encoded into long-term memory, it can be recalled, and you do better on your tests. And life. The serial position effect. This is the cocktail party, or you're being introduced to a whole bunch of family you don't know. Oh, this is Johnny, and this is Aunt Sally, and this is so and so, and this is so and so, and this is so, and you are just going, I'm not going to remember any of these people. Most of the time nowadays, we don't even try to bother learning people's names. For better or for worse. But what the serial position effect tells us is that, and this is actually borne out in a lot of advice people will give you in life, that most of the time people will remember the first and the last person in a series that they meet, or the first and last concepts in a string of concepts that they learn. Now, this is why people will say, well, you know what? If you're going for a job interview, you should find out when the last few are and try to get in there. That could backfire because you'll be the most memorable at that point. At the same time, they might have actually already found a really good candidate earlier in the day, and they're just going through these other job interviewees without actually really giving them the piece, the theory of mind to really dedicated to them to actually look at them critically. They might just be like, okay, next, yeah, sure, we'll let you know. And you might be actually the best candidate, but they have actually already made up their mind. They'll say, oh, get the first one. They might not have had their coffee yet, like me in the morning. And they might not actually be ready to dedicate the emotional and intellectual energy to actually really judging you as a qualified candidate or not. So there is something to this whole serial position effect, but your mileage may vary, okay? What we encode on 261 here, visual encoding, acoustic encoding, semantic encoding. It's, guys, it's straightforward, simple. Visual encoding is visual information. Acoustic encoding is things we hear, right? You hear a smoke detector going off. Do you have to wonder if that's your cell phone? No, you know it's a smoke detector, and you got to figure out what's burning. Let's say you're driving along, and you're driving down the road, and you're approaching something with these big X's on it, and you hear a large blaring air horn coming towards you with an increasing pitch of, like, indicative of the Doppler effect. Now, do you just go, oh, I wonder what that is? Or do you slow down or stop before going over that railroad crossing? You stop because you know what that sound means. Semantic encoding. Semantics are, well, how you feel, right? Encoding a meaning, including the meaning of words. No, semantic isn't physiological encoding, sorry. Semantic encoding is the encoding of words. And how we use words, and what words mean, and what power they convey. For instance, if I said, the results of the test were lackluster. The results of the test were terrible. You should all be ashamed of yourselves of the results of the test. All those things noted my disapproval with the results of the test, but those words carry different weights, right? We've talked about this. One of the most damaging things and traumatic things that a parent could say to you is, I'm disappointed in you. What's interesting is how much power those words can actually carry. Some words carry different meanings, or even the same concepts can carry two different names. We've talked about the concept of the quote-unquote death tax versus the estate tax. Basically, if your estate is worth 2-point-something million when you die, then the federal government takes a percentage of it. And not many people die with that much money at all. Not many people accumulate that much money in their lifetime. At the same time, but if politicians want to get traction for it, they'll call it a death tax and say, you know what, guys? The federal government will even tax you when you're dead. And some of its most vocal supporters were people who actually the law would never have affected. You can see the semantic argument also with the concept and debate over abortion. You have pro-choice, right? And then you have pro-life. And then you have pro-life, anti-abortion, right? And sometimes they'll say anti-abortion, but they mostly say pro-life, right? Who's not against life, right? Pro-choice. Did they say we're pro-abortion? No, they don't say that. And the reason these organizations code their messages and even their names is to try to shape your thinking about how you respond to them. If you think about some of these political organizations, um, uh, I'm drawing a blank right now, but they always sound nationalistic. They always sound something that any willing, any decent-minded person would actually support. Great example. Sorry, just remembered it. The Patriot Act. Who would be against patriotism and an act to support patriotic things? Right after 9/11, nobody in their right mind would vote against it. Actually, one person did, but that's for poli-sci class. But semantics, guys, are extremely powerful. Extremely, extremely powerful. Now, why? Why? When somebody's recalling a memory, they'll close their eyes. Because their memory to them was encoded as visual information. Things that they saw. Some people will, we talked about the use of aromatics and different smells within stores to keep shoppers there longer or to make them feel more comfortable, and how this correlates to actually increased spending by each consumer. Why during the holidays stores will actually literally pump in baking cookie smells or baked good smells into their stores to make the customer feel more invited and have a better experience, which equals more money in the till at the end of the day. Now, our earliest memories, probably of something that happened at age 3 or 4, involved visual imagery. It's interesting. We more easily remember concrete words, which lend themselves to visual and mental images. My earliest memory, actually, was a Florida vacation, and I would encourage you to think back to your earliest memory. I was in my grandparents' house, and my mom came in to tuck me into bed, and to keep me from fussing, because I'd been on an airplane ride, she actually, hold on, let me go and get it. My mom actually, I remember this, I was in a crib, and my mom brought this over to me, and it was at night, and it was this. This is a Rubbermaid, actually it's Tupperware, and with stickers from the Muppet Show on it. Good old 80s show, right? And it was full of my toys from a kid. Toys I would have played with when I was 3 or 4, such as like Little People and stuff like that. So I remember that because I had this actual physical reminder of the memory, and also I remember even the lighting in the room. I remember it was dark out, and I wasn't used to going to sleep when it was dark out, and so they left a hall light on for me. And I remember my mom giving me a hug and saying goodnight, and I could play with my toys until I fell asleep in the crib. I don't remember talking. I don't remember the trip. I would imagine I would remember a plane ride, but I don't. And why were these memories encoded this way, and why am I able to recall them? I have no idea. Or does the book give us an idea why? So it involves visual imagery. Earliest memories, 3 and 4. Who would I have basic trust in as a 3 or 4-year-old? An airplane full of strangers? Or my mom tucking me into bed? My mom tucking me into bed. And that kind of perhaps explains why I was able to encode that memory and still have it to this day, while the whole exciting plane trip, nothing. I got nothing. I do remember a little bit of the plane ride home, but that's another story. Now, on 265, it talks about encoding. Let's take a look at it here. So I'm going to look that closely on it. But we have encoding, meaning, imagery, organization, chunks, and hierarchies. Chunks, guys, that's kind of like schema. It's the categorizations that schema creates for us, or concepts of schema. And hierarchies, what's most important in remembering a certain event? Am I going to remember what I ate for? Do I remember what I ate for lunch on November 12th? No, I have no idea. I don't even know what day of the week what that was. And even if I did know, or I knew if it was a red and white day, I would still have zero idea. Unless it was a Wednesday and it was a white day, in which my 4th block class would have told me to go and get free pizza. And I probably would have gotten some meatball pizza, because it seems like nobody, not meatball, sausage, because it seems like nobody eats that in our school. And so it's always left over, thankfully. So we organize our memories, we conceptualize our memories, we categorize our memories, and it's a web of meaning, guys. It's a web. It's not just like, oh, I remember this because of this. No, you remember it in multiple dimensions. So, turning to page 266. Not that much more to go, guys. Relax. I know you're like, oh, Mr. Host, there's 31 minutes left. When are we going to get done? Not much more to go. What is sensory memory? Sensory memory. It's sensory memory, guys. So, Sperling's experiment revealed that we have a fleeting photographic memory called iconic memory. For a few tenths of a second, our eyes register an exact representation of a scene, and we can recall any part of it in amazing detail. But if Stirling delayed the tone signal by more than half a second, the image faded, and participants, again, recalled only about half the letters. Our memories are actually very fragile things and are very prone to being damaged and manipulated. Quite honestly, like eyewitness testimony and stuff like that isn't reliable, very reliable at all. It can be, of course, but what I'm saying is it is also open to manipulation. I'm going to post a couple of stories and enrichments at the end of this. I'm not going to do it interspersed this time, but I'll give you specific instructions on both of those. The other is echoic memory. This is when I catch you playing with your phone underneath the desk, and I ask you a question, and you're actually able to repeat the last 3 or 4 words I say. It's things that are kind of stuck in your memory. Your brain, remember, is always receiving and perceiving and sensing, but it isn't always paying attention. So when I say, hey, what did I just ask you? Your memory actually kicks in and remembers those last few seconds, like a little bit of a black box data recorder. And it's able to recall those things, which kind of saves you from looking like you don't know what anything is going on. And we've all experienced this to one degree or another. So it's echoic memory. Now, with short-term memory, what are the duration and capacity of short-term and long-term memory? Unfortunately, guys, a lot of you try to, Find out quickly that short-term memory will disappear. Lloyd Peterson and Margaret Peterson asked people to remember 3 consonant groups such as CHJ to prevent rehearsal. The researchers asked them, for example, to start at 100 and count backward by threes. After 3 seconds, people recalled the letters only about half at a time. After 12 seconds, they seldom recalled them at all. Without active processing, short-term memories have a limited life. And this is why when, let's say, I say something in class, like the students who typically do the best in class, if it's something insightful that's not in the textbook or something like that, and they've already read the textbook, good job, they'll write it down. Because the minute we go, oh, that was kind of cool, I'll remember that and look into it later. We never remember it. But the minute you think about it and you process it and you rehearse it and you say it over again in your brain, you've actually already started the process of actually building memory. You are doing rehearsal as you say it to yourself and as you actually physically write it. You're engaging basically the different sensation, perception, your motor cortex. You're actually visualizing the words. You are converting the word from audiological to visual to tactile to reproduce then the visual. There's a lot of brain processing that goes along in that, and at all that whole course of time, you are rehearsing that information. That's why taking notes in an active environment is actually a decent way to remember things. A lot of people complain, well, but if I take the note, I don't need the note because I remember it. That's great. And you remember it because you actually did take the note. Long-term memory, guys. Long-term memory, it's more difficult to build. We all know you need the correct amount of sleep to build long-term memories, to actually convert that memory into the short-term working memory throughout the day, to long-term retrievable longitudinal duration memory. There's a lot of things that go into affecting your ability to turn short-term memory into long-term memory. It could be trauma. It could be the amount of sleep you get. It could be if you are on drugs or alcohol. It could be a number of factors, including also physiological damage to the brain. So storing memories in the brain. This is where it starts getting cool. How does the brain store our memories? Well, it stores our memories as actually proteins. It's a number of neurons that actually are used together that form a memory, that form I'm completely drawing on a protein. It builds the protein that when decoded then acts on those neurons and refires it. So let me break it down for you. You see something. You form a memory. It gets encoded into your brain as chemical energy. When it's decoded and you remember it, guess what? That chemical message, the memory is actually destroyed. But through the process of you experiencing it again, you re-encode the memory back into your brain. So let me put it to you this way. Let's think of our brain as a hard drive, the bad analogy, or the filing cabinet. You remember a memory, like my memory from when I was like 3 or 4, right? When I remembered that, I remembered the memory of me last remembering it. I recalled that story. I told it to you. A rehearsal. Whether it be experience or actual verbal rehearsal or thinking about it. Then, in the same process, it gets re-encoded into my brain as a memory. So the memory of me being only 3 or 4 years old and my mom putting me into bed at my grandparents' house in Florida is not a memory that's 30 years old. It's a memory that's 5 minutes old. That's what it breaks down to. And this is how memory can be corrupted and changed over time. This is how people who have been quite honestly, not so nice in their life, can totally remember things differently. Because at the same time, when we, let's say, we remember things from the past, and when we re-encode them today, we re-encode them with the knowledge of today. So we can't get away from passing judgment. For instance, with the civil rights movement, if we look at somebody who's, let's say, a white supremacist during the civil rights movement, right? Somebody who's protesting against the desegregation of schools. Now, that person today, remembering it, would remember it not as being them protesting against African Americans coming into schools. They would be protesting to ensure that their community stayed the same. It's semantics, but they don't color it, pardon the pun, with the zeitgeist, basically the troubling thing of the day from the past, but color it in a positive light of today. For instance, I've talked to you about my father busting out with 2 years ago. Oh, do you remember the good old days when you were young? And I looked at him and I'm like, what are you even talking about? How are they good old days? But for him, when he remembers it, he colors it as basically his life and his perception of what he did as the best he could, and that things were different. It's also a coping mechanism when you start encoding things differently from the past. So memory, guys, is, let's say, for instance, I'm remembering the last day of school before break. And as I'm remembering it, I'm decoding it in my brain right now. I'm remembering it. I'm sensing it in my mind. I'm having the visualization. I'm having some of the olfactory things. I'm having some of the tastes. And some of the feelings of elation, of relaxation. But at the same time, I re-encode that into my brain, and that memory is now new. That's how memory works. And if we interrupt that re-encoding process with, say, a drug, or even just drugs and alcohol themselves, you can actually lose memory. Or if basically you were manipulated and conditioned during the process of remembering and then re-encoding, you can actually produce false memories within individuals. That's kind of scary. Synaptic changes over time, guys. It goes back to the childhood video. Remember, ties that are reinforced are made stronger. The synaptic ties. Those that are not maintained, those that are not strengthened, are pruned, in which shapes our thinking, or shapes our cognitive ability, and shapes our approach to even life itself. Stress hormones and memory. Now, this is very, very, very interesting. With stress hormones and memory, guys, stress hormones tend to make you remember, to basically, because you're actively perceiving at a very, very fast rate. But at the same time, they are open to manipulation over time of remembering and re-encoding, decoding and re-encoding. The memories get shifted to be less about the event and more about yourself, and what you personally experienced. This phenomenon is called the flashbulb effect, the flashbulb memory. For your parents, and actually probably grandparents, because it's from my parents, the question was always, where were you when Kennedy was shot? And people have these very vivid memories of where they were and what they heard and how people reacted. And the reactions in the country were very, very varied. If I remember, I'll include another video, um, some online content about how different people reacted to Kennedy, where in actually many southern schools and down south, elementary schools, kids cheered because Kennedy was so hated by their parents. Now, the question for our generation is, where were you during 9/11, right? And when people are asked that, and when they retell their stories, it's their story. They are the main character. It wasn't what happened during that day, it's what happened to them that day. And the same thing with, I'm recalling my mom's recollection of learning that Kennedy was shot, and she was in grade school. If I remember right, she was in second or third grade, and it came over the announcements in elementary school, and everyone was really upset. And my mom remembered that, and that the teachers were upset and everything else like that. So that's called a flashbulb memory. It's a memory where people, our brain kind of, and us sometimes even cognitively, we make the cognizant decision to remember this. And we try to. Does it always work? No. But many times it will. It might be the day your kid is born. I do remember part of my high school graduation. It was hot. It was outside. Half of my face got sunburned. Yeah. Do I remember who spoke? No. Do I remember who I sat next to? Yeah. Do I remember anything else? Do I remember if I even drove to it? Or I drove with my parents? I don't even remember that. But I remember sitting in the sun. Do I remember things like 9/11? Yeah, totally. Do I remember my college graduation? Yep. Do I remember getting married? Yeah. Do I remember my kids being born? Yeah. Do I remember what I had for lunch on November 12th? No. It's not a flashbulb moment. And storing implicit and explicit memories, guys. These talks, well, the concept of amnesia, in which they're unable to form new memories. They talk about HM. HM actually, well, yeah, he died in 2008. I'm glad this is a relatively new textbook. It's an old textbook, didn't mention that he actually died. I'm going to be putting the Nova clip that I'll be posting. Actually talks about him in some great detail, and some of the new research that has come about after his death. This is a man who couldn't remember anything since 1953. Every day he woke up, every moment, his short-term memory was only about 2 minutes long, and then he wouldn't be able to remember anything except 1953. He thought everything. Let me make sure I got that year right. Yeah, 1953. And then the book talks about it. I was getting conflated with another subject who actually suffered a brain injury in 1945, and thought for the rest of his life it was 1945. These people give us a very interesting glimpse into what life is like without short-term memory. I can only imagine it being very isolating, scary, and confusing. Now, read about the role of implicit, explicit memory. The hippocampus is extremely important. The hippocampus, that was what was removed from HM, which caused him to lose his ability to form long-term memories. So they didn't really know what they were removing from his brain. They thought it was related to a seizure disorder he had. But it actually, when they did the neurological psychosurgery, they actually removed the part of the brain that formed long-term memory. And that's how we learned about that, unfortunately. Learn about the role of the cerebellum and finish up on 274. Now, guys, that leaves us 274 to 294 for next video. It's 50 minutes in. If you actually consume the other content, it'll round out this entire thing to about 2 hours 10 minutes, 2.5 hours. That's not bad. Okay. If you have any questions, just email me or message me on Enmodo. But until then, enjoy the rest of your break.